I am a geologist, and climate change for a geologist is something that you always study. We studied it before it was a big deal. It was just part of the science. And when it started getting political, a lot of the older scientists, when I was younger and had hair, said scientists should never be political. Those days are gone. The scientists know where the science came from. So we are obligated, in my opinion, to convey the facts in an understandable way to everybody, especially our lawmakers. So Ann and I are part of Citizens Climate Lobby. I am the state coordinator for that organization. We have about 110,000 people across the country, and we have a member, a volunteer in every district for Congress. So we're busy. And what I'd like to do today, and we're going to have a discussion session after about a half hour of looking at stuff. I'm going to go over some data you know. And the reason I want to go over this data is I want to make sure that we understand what it means and how it's related to other data you might know. And I want to do this because one thing I find is when we were talking, for instance, one time to Chris Murphy's office, early on, a couple of years ago, it was clear that he was kind of confused on some issues. And how can you make the right law if you're confused on some issues? Now, he started to sort a lot of that out. But I think he's going to run for president sometime. And I want him to be leading on this, not wondering if he's got the right thing worked out in his mind about climate change. So we're working on our Connecticut people as well as other people in Congress. And I have a book up here called Navigating the Energy Maze that I wrote 8 bills in the back that we need for a comprehensive national sustainable energy policy. And the first thing we need is a price on carbon. So you can hear me say that a lot, a price on carbon. That kicks everything else off. If we don't get a price on carbon, it is really a Sisyphean task of rolling the boulder uphill. So, which we're already in the middle of. So, what I'd like to do is, some of this stuff will go a little bit fast, just for time and things, but also because you're probably familiar with it. What you're going to see is being recorded back here, and I'll give the file to Jason so it can go on the website through a YouTube link or something, and you can watch it again if you want, and we'll be off to the races. So, let's see if I can hit that thing. What was that? Yeah. So, Rise Up Mystic is quite important. I'm Citizens Climate Lobby, the IPC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of course, the organizations in our state as well as the U.S. government. We have to all do this together. Am I talking loud enough? Can you hear me? Otherwise, we can hold this thing. That map shows what happens if all the ice melts. Not going to happen in our lifetime, but in our kids' lifetime, we're going to see some stuff. We're going to go through climate issues. We're going to look at some of the reports, the new one as well. We're going to talk about sustainability just briefly and solutions. We're also going to look at the impacts of climate on Connecticut very briefly. We're going to look at what Citizens Climate Lobby does. We're also going to look at local actions, state and regional actions, and federal actions, and what we can do to progress this forward and get a price on carbon. So, one of the things that's really important is to make sure when you're talking to a politician, you know the difference between climate and weather. Weather is a short-term thing that affects our daily activities, maybe a week, maybe a month, up to a year or so. When we're talking about climate, we're looking at longer-term things. There's no sharp divide. A few years out, a decade out, and so on. What we know basically about global warming is that the Earth is warming. The air can hold more moisture. This creates more evaporation. This means more energy is in the system, ice melts, oceans expand, and the planet warms. So here's some things about climate. NASA has got just a wealth of information, and a lot of this stuff is coming from them. So one of the things I want you to remember that the Earth is dynamic. It's not a graph, and it's not a news headline. It's changing every moment, and it's dynamic. This is a map of 1 year of CO2 in the atmosphere in 2006. Look at all that CO2 in red in the northern hemisphere. The winter months. We get into summer, the trees start consuming that CO2 through photosynthesis, and it goes down, but it picks up in the southern hemisphere where it's winter. And then we get into winter again. This map from 1880 to 2017 shows the average annual temperature. Notice that it started out kind of blues and light yellows. Look at now we're in the 90s, now we're in the 2000s, and it turns red. This is a factual database. This means that we know, not theorizing, we know it's fact. This map, in the recent report that was just released, shows how the country has been warming up. Here's 100-degree days in 2011, all over the place. And this is widespread drought in 2012. More than 2/3 of the country. And then 5 years later, we might get floods, okay? Wildfires. In the last 3 decades, we've seen more and more wildfires out west as the west dries out, plants die, catch fire, and the place burns. This is a map of all the countries of the world from 1900 to now. Those little stripes you see popping up are showing you that those countries are measuring their own data, showing you that the whole planet is getting warm. You see, this is just not one scientist or one university or one group. We also have increased precipitation in the upper Midwest and in New England here, okay? So these things are measured. That's the key thing. They're measured. This is not theory, okay? Another thing that's not theory is looking at the poles, 1984 to 2016. This is the ice cap in the Arctic. Look at how every year it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There's a thing up here called ancient ice, and we're losing that ancient ice as the planet warms. This is Greenland. This is the mass of the ice measured in how thick it is, and look at the graph over the period of time from 2004 to 2014, 10 years, and we're losing a tremendous amount of mass. That microcontinent is melting. These are particles in the atmosphere. They're from fires, they're from sulfates, dust, organic carbon from smokestacks, and also in the oceans, sea salt is whipped up. These particles make intense storms like hurricanes and typhoons. And I'm going to show you in 2017 the hurricanes track. Now this is dust coming off of the Hamatan, off of Africa. See how it's seeding clouds. You can see hurricanes. There goes Irma, there goes Jose, and here's Maria that hit Puerto Rico so bad. And these things are just being whipped up. When you look at this thing in fast motion, you realize this planet is incredibly dynamic. And it's being affected by all the stuff we're putting into the air. This is what's happening. Another thing, cows. 20% of the greenhouse gases are because we eat so much meat. How about that? So, the IPCC and the U.S. National Climate Assessment Reports have some very fundamental things to say. One is that there's still time to get some of this right if we act now. Here's the 13 agencies that Jason was talking about that sent this to the White House. Okay? This is no small thing. They confirm that in about 1940 we had a crossover and the planet has been warming at an alarming rate ever since. They confirm that coal, oil, gas, and even manufacturing cement, which takes a lot of energy, is correlatable with that 1-to-1. And the forcings, that is stuff like solar flares and all the little things that affect our atmosphere, are related to human activity and correlating 1-to-1 with the warming of the planet. Okay? So now we have all these models. If we don't change and keep consuming fossil fuels, we're going to heat up this globe, and it's going to be uncomfortable. This is if we did everything right. We're on this track right now, and that's why we need to put a price on carbon. Okay? So, the National Climate Assessment Report said that climate change actually harms the economics of the United States of America. And the IPCC report said that if we don't act within 12 years, we cannot keep the planet under 1.5 degrees centigrade increase. So when you're talking to the congressional people, they might say, well, I can find somebody who says this is all baloney. Yeah, but look at it. It was only 3 out of 100. Okay. So here we are. We're on this nice little blue marble. And we're trying to figure out, how can we move forward and get everybody behind us? I urge you to think about sustainability. The environment, the community, and the economy. The environment is the big sphere. Okay? That's the planet. It's also your backyard or your house. The community is within that. Can't have a community if you don't have a place to put it. And the economy is in there. So we can think of sustainability as finding the balance between what we use and what nature provides in these 3 spheres. But the application of metrics that measure the actions that promote aggressive improvements in the environment, enrichment of our community, and equitability of economy while working towards zero net impact to the planet is the working definition that I use for sustainability. So I made this graph a few years ago. In 1984 or so, we crossed a threshold where the planet cannot feed all the people on it. And through those calculations and doing global resources on coal, oil, and natural gas, 2030 to 2035 is a really key point for a geologist. That's when we run out of enough oil to run civilization the way we are today. There's still oil on the planet, but we don't have enough to have the quality of life by burning fossil fuels like we are today. So that's why we have to act now and not leave this mess for the next generations. So impacts to Connecticut. There's actually quite a few of them. So we're part of the Northeast. And if you throw New York and Pennsylvania and some of these other states in there, you realize that, oh, look it, we're actually part of the whole United States. What a shock, right? And look at that, we're just right up there, and we're yellow, which means we're not, we got some impacts on sea level rise. And these are the frequencies of floods. Some of these areas are getting 30 floods a year that they weren't getting 20, 30, 40 years ago, okay? And this is just, Texas, Florida, the southeastern seaboard, the mid-seaboard, and there's New London, Connecticut with 3 or 4 more floods than they normally get, okay? Here is Bridgeport in London, and you can see that we measure sea level rise right here. It's not a uniform increasing of the depth of the ocean, okay, because there's lots of factors in that. But we also see, every 5, 10 years, an increase in the yellow of human-influenced intensity of storms. When I say human influence, that's because we burn fossil fuels. And this waterfront property is for sale. So climate change has a high impact on the eastern seaboard here. And oh, there we are. Right? So over on the southwestern side, all these little purple areas are areas that they flood. Here's Bridgeport. And this is because of sea level rise. These are direct effects on our coast. New Haven, Brantford, flooding all those estuaries in places where people have homes. This is the flood risk in 2013, 30, and 2100. A lot of New Haven is actually impacted. Okay, right here. Old Lyme, Old Saybrook. Whew, that's loads of poverty. Okay, and there's New London. Look at all this stuff. Huh? We're heavily impacted by the rise of sea level. It's not the only thing that's hitting us, but that's a big one. So let's think about climate refugees. If your home is flooded out, you become a refugee. After Katrina, this is where hundreds of thousands of people migrated away from New Orleans. Look at that. They even came up here. This happens after these big mega storms. In fact, a large part of the early last century workforce in Chicago got there because of a hurricane. Also, here's $8.7 million of damage to infrastructure in New London from sea level rise. Now, New Haven is tracking their greenhouse gases, okay? So let's take a look at where we can store carbon without geoengineering something, which, if you want to talk about that later, I can. Here's what we're making with fossil fuels, and that little graph down there is what the forests can handle. So we have an increase in forests in the Northeast because most of the farmland has gone to the Midwest or out west. So when we look at that, we have forest types that are struggling, and they're struggling, just a whole bunch of different tree types here, because the forests are being forced to migrate north because the planet and their ecosystems are warming and they're uncomfortable. This is ticks. Lyme's disease, right? Boy, these people over there in Illinois who never thought they'd see a Lyme disease tick, guess what? They're there. Fisheries. Here's Connecticut, Red Hake. They're migrating north along the coast because the ocean is getting warmer, so they move out of the normal fisheries. All of the fish and lobster are doing that. So it's a huge thing. So here's some climate trends from these reports. The temperature, up to 2 degrees increase. Sea level, up to 4 degrees by the end of this century. Ocean acidification, ice melting, extreme weather, intense hurricanes, severe storms, increased precipitation, and longer frost-free days. Right here in the Northeast, more heat waves, extreme precipitation and coastal flooding with sea level rise and storm surge, expanded ecosystem stress, human health risks through insects, food security, water, and so on and so forth. So they have this cascading effect. When we mess with the environment, your food suffers, your health suffers. This is what we're going to be like in 2017, 2070. We're going to be like south, just north of Florida. Okay. You want to live in Florida? You can go down there now or just wait a few years. So Citizens Climate Lobby, really cool group. There's the founder over there. And Ann and I joined a few, 3-4 years ago, something like that. This is one of the conventions, the 7th annual one in Washington, D.C., where typically between 1,000 or 1,500 people gather. And Jason is a member, because I twisted his arm. And one of the things we do here is we have Lobby Day. We do this twice a year. And we try to meet with every office of Congress. 535 offices. Last year we met with about 505 or 510 of them. We support an integrated carbon price that rises incrementally and has a carbon fee and dividend as an overarching policy. I'll explain that. But we are a not-for-profit, nonpartisan grassroots group, very much like Rise Up Mystic. And our director, Mark Reynolds, is out in California. And we want to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individuals They have breakthroughs, and they're exercising a personal power. We call this empowerment, okay? We do this by connecting people, respect, common ground, information, partnerships, positive vision. We listen, we ask, we educate. So the carbon fee and dividend is $15 per ton of CO2 emitted from coal, oil, natural gas at the mine site or the well or the port of first entry. It goes up $10 a year, and 100% of those fees are sent back to each of your households. So that as the power companies increase the power bill, you can afford to pay your bill, so you're not penalized as we make this transformation. I can talk more about that later. So one of the things we're going through is a lot of strategic mapping. We look at mitigation and adaptation and resilience, sustainability, peer-reviewed science, profits and lifestyle, education, accounting for carbon dioxide, and seeing what kind of eco-engineering can be done without making things worse. So all of these go into the toolkit, if you will, of how do we approach Congress, and how do we give them ideas and help and the expertise to get this done. One thing is mitigation. That's an action to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. The other thing is adaptation. This is different. This is adjusting in the natural or human systems in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli or their effects, which moderates, harms, or exploits the beneficial opportunities. So, the report that just came out that said climate change presents us both with challenges, yes, and opportunities. So, here's kind of an approach. Again, we're based in sustainability, the sphere of the environment, the sphere of the community, and the sphere of the economy. And we're going to look at mitigation and adaptation and impacts. These are the things that can harm us and our world, and this is how we're going to deal with it. We're going to adapt or we're going to fix it. Fixing it is tremendously expensive. Having a transformation in our economy so that we are a renewable energy economy, a zero carbon economy, is actually cheaper and provides more jobs in the long run. The other thing we want to do then is understand sustainable development, as in putting in renewable energy systems, growing our own food. We have to understand climate change and disaster risk, so when the sea level goes up or the intense storm hits, or the crops all die and we can't get food to people. How do we manage that in a sustainable society? Well, that takes our elected leaders, as well as us as helpers, and a culture of cooperation. It means we really use our networks and our relationships, and we're change ready. That means that we don't get too discouraged when something pops up. We're problem solvers, so we're going to go solve that. So all of this is part of the global response to how we can treat climate change. We also look at a really interesting thing called risk. Exposure, vulnerability, and hazard. Mapping out risk is what successful companies do because it helps them prepare for the unexpected. I expect something to happen, but I don't know what it is. This is a map of the interrelationships of our electrical system. And here's another one of population and energy. They're really simple systems, aren't they? You can see in a few moments how to solve this problem. So it takes all of us. We all have expertise. It might be being able to talk to someone. So what's the role of government in this? We have dynamic capitalism, and we have to have a healthy democracy, or this does not work. So, in the context of innovation, the government can help with the long view, policy-making, partnerships. They can be the risk takers. That's what we hire them for. That's what we vote for them. Innovation and market-driven solutions. The government can help us with this through our tax dollars and through our efforts. So governing is kind of like the art of planning and predicting. So if we look at technology and we look at the markets, and we have these different kinds of technologies and markets here,
And as we go up to more radical or new ideas, that's called risk. That's risk. And if I take on risk and I fail, it could ruin my life. But if we all do it together, we can actually get through this. That's the application of sustainability, the environment, the community, and the economy as a solution-based approach. Now in 2015, the governor founded his Governor's Council on Climate Change, GC3. Good step forward. Set some goals that he cannot, not there anymore, but he cannot match. So let's look at coordination between local, state, and national policies. Here's some local city policies. A climate action plan, carbon pricing policy, zero emission targets for city vehicles, renewable energy, public transportation, education, and local wind programs, like getting that plastic bag ban that Jason was talking about. So, in Westbrook, they've got a sustainable plan, and they've included some of these things, like recycling, education, green neighborhoods, stuff like that. Using leadership, and environmental and engineering development, design. And so there's things that are out there that we can just adapt to and adopt to our project. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're actually using our collaborative community to solve this. On a state level, we have the regional greenhouse gas emission. Great idea, that's working. We have the equivalent state carbon tax, zero emissions targets. These things we're working on in Connecticut to get that through right now. State actions could be carbon tax, renewable energy incentives, electric vehicle infrastructure, the plastic bag ban, jobs in this new industry, new business incubators, and especially youth and social programs. Many, many more. We look at the national level. That's where we are with Citizens Climate Lobby. We want a carbon fee and dividend bill. It's a federal bill. And a comprehensive, sustainable national energy policy. So we link all of how we power our homes and our cars and our businesses through non-carbon sources. So that is a very quick look at how we can take all of this science and apply it to policy making. Does that make sense? So if we can get the policy makers, and probably about a solid, well, we're probably actually over half in the House and the Senate, believe it or not. And here's why. One of the things that Citizens Climate Lobby founded is called the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. Now, wording is really important. We didn't call it a climate change caucus because there were some people in Congress that said, I don't believe in climate change. Just a touchstone here, science is not a religion. You don't believe in science like you would believe in God, right? Well, if you do, okay. But it's not a faith. We agree with the interpretations of the facts, or we don't agree with the interpretation of the facts. That's what scientists do. And we do a lot of stuff on probabilities. There's a 95% probability that humans are largely responsible for warming of the planet. 95%. Now somebody will say, I'm not going to believe this unless it's 100%. What is 100% in anybody's life? So what if I came up to you and said, you know, there's a 95% probability you're going to make $1 million on that investment. You go, no! I got to have 100%, right? Of course you would. We all would, right? There goes the retirement account. How about, I've got the thing that's bugging my back, and I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you know, studies show that 95% of the people have a full recovery if they do this. And you go, wow. No, it's got to be 100%. Science is probabilities. Why? Because the Earth is complicated. We understand a lot of it, but every day we discover something new. Also, if you want to model something like a plate of spaghetti, you got to know where every single noodle goes. But if we approximate that plate of spaghetti by simplifying it, that's a model, we can then make some predictions. And then what we do in the case of climate is we make a model based on the data we have, and then we go back in time to when the data started and say, let's just run this thing and see if we get the same answer that the Earth is telling us. That's called backcasting. So the 7 climate models that we use to model the Earth, one of them is if we just keep burning fossil fuels like they're going out of style. Another one is if we go to a transformative, sustainable economy. Okay? Very different answers. But guess what? When we go to the one that looks like we're burning fossil fuels till they're going out of style, we are underestimating the rate of change. The Earth is actually changing faster than our models. The reason the models aren't accurately predicting the rate of change is because the Earth is bloody complicated. It's that plate of spaghetti, and then you came in and put another plate of spaghetti on it, and then you came in and put another plate of spaghetti on it, and you're like, how do I model this thing, right? It's really a mess, okay? And then somebody throws it at the wall, and all your models are a mess. So, the thing is about science that we have to continuously educate the elected officials on is that it's probabilities because the Earth is a complicated place. Can you think of one other thing that's complicated? People! People. How simple are people? Ask a man if he understands the woman, it's like, okay, right? So the thing is, people are complicated, and people are burning fossil fuels, and have lifestyle expectations and quality of life expectations. And we dig holes in the ground to get the coal and the oil out, right? As well as 35 metals we need for civilization. And we do all of this, and we're unpredictable. But we hate change, don't we? How many of you make 30-year plans? Oh, really?
Well, my house, I bought it in '76.
Okay, that's hindcasting. That's saying you didn't.
We're still working on it.
30. Okay, so how many people?
I believe
40
it's
people in here.
still
We have one gentleman who would plan 30 years ahead. So that's about right, actually, statistically. Now, how many are just trying to plan what are we going to do for dinner after this guy's right? And so, as you talk so hard, I'm really getting hungry now. And so that's what my wife is doing. She's thinking, what should we make when Roger stops talking? So it's got to be quick, right? Right. So that is looking at complicated systems. Okay. So that's what we have to convey to the policymakers. So when the policymakers say, I'm going to write a bill, and I have no idea what it's about, you're there to help. Oh, you want to write something about the environment? We know these things, and we have statistics that can let us predict these things. And that's okay. So when somebody high in office, I have no idea who, might say, I don't believe it, they are just doing this. Right? So our job is not to get mad at that individual. I know. I'm in therapy over this. Not to get mad about this, but say, okay, let's go to every single person that can have an influence on that person and get them to work for us, right? By changing their minds. And like Jason said, Rise Up Mystic got probably thousands of people to get out and vote. Thousands, maybe 5,000 to 10,000 people to get out and vote, going from Bob's numbers.
Maybe a million.
Maybe a million. It's like Chicago, vote early and vote often, right? So the thing is, we can direct this change through our vote. And the thing that I need help on, and Ann and I need help on, is we need a price on carbon. Everything else is like pushing that boulder uphill. But if we get a price on carbon, and then somebody says, but carbon isn't a pollutant. CO2, right? But I'm part of nature, so are you. But if you dig coal out of the ground
Nature was done with that carbon 300 million years ago. That's sequestered carbon. That's not part of the modern carbon cycle. When we burn that sequestered carbon, that's pollution, and that's what you explain to the politician. Okay? So now, we can talk about this if you have questions. You want to lead the thing, or see, does anybody have comments or questions? Yeah.
When you want to get to talk to a politician who is ignorant, and you're trying to connect them with reality, how much time are they willing to give you? You've spoken for almost an hour here, at least more than half an hour, and will they give you that much time?
Sometimes. Ann and I, typically half an hour for a meeting in the Hall of Congress. Ann and I were in the hallway when Chris Collins, we tried to have, he's a politician who got reelected even though he did something not right. That says a lot about how you vote. But anyways, we had a meeting scheduled with him, but he wasn't there. But we met him, about 5 of us from Citizens Climate. We met him running back to his office. And we said, oh, Congressman, we'd like to talk to you about climate change. Don't believe it, don't believe it, don't believe it. I was just up in the Arctic, and there's not a single scientist up in the Arctic that thinks it's real. I happen to have worked in the Arctic, and I know some of those scientists, and I think he got it wrong. So, he said, the first thing we got to do is we got to get rid of all subsidies on renewable energy, because that's just sucking up all the tax dollars. And I said, well, do you know what energy source gets more subsidies than any other? Can you guess?
Oil.
No. No.
Yeah.
Ethanol.
No. Nuclear. Because of the liability, right? It's, if something goes up wrong, there's no company in the world or insurance company that would want to insure that, even Lloyd's of London. So, the U.S. government takes on the liability, takes on the cleanup. So that's probably about 40 to 45% of the subsidies that your tax dollars go to. Now, I happen to think we still need nuclear energy for a while, okay? And the new reactors that are being built are very different than the old ones. But then we look at the remaining 55% of subsidies, and I went through 13 agencies, in fact, the agencies that are up there, and I went line by line through their budget and added it all up. $1.81 billion every year. Renewables only get about 18, 20% of that. The rest is oil, coal, and natural gas. Now, some of the subsidies are really good. They're for education programs. But some of them are just to give Exxon a break on a lease in the Gulf of Mexico. So we told this to the congressman, and he stood there, and he looked at us, and he says, then we should get rid of all subsidies. I said, but you're pro-nuclear, so you know what that will do. And he says, well, then I don't know what to do. And a year later, he joined the Climate Solutions Caucus. The first guy in the House to support Trump joined the Climate Solutions Caucus. After we had this and follow-up meetings with him. So the short answer is, get a half hour and you can do a lot. Yeah?
I want to ask about you're talking about doing a dividend. So it's sort of like you're taking the money on one end and then just giving it back to people anyway. I mean, if you don't impose some burden somewhere, how are you going to incentivize people to use less of this stuff?
You use the free market economy. So it's called a fee instead of a tax, by the way, because Grover Norquist, you might recall, got a lot of people to sign the no new tax pledge, right? And a tax is something the government collects, it goes into the general fund, and then is redistributed by Congress during budget time. A fee goes back to the people. So all the Republicans can actually vote for this and not violate their pledge, which is kind of an interesting thing. Now, this is applied to the point of production or first import, at the mine, the well, or the port of first entry. So all the downstream businesses that use that chunk of coal or that barrel of oil or that cubic foot of natural gas, they say, oh, I have to charge my customer more because I have to pay for this because they're charging me for it, right? So now, you go home, turn on the lights, and there's your power bill, and it's up 20% because of this carbon fee. And you go, but I didn't do anything wrong. Right next to that bill is a check from the Treasury Department. And if you're in the lower 2/3 of income earners in the United States, you'll break even or actually make a little bit of money. So you open that up, and it's $5 more than the rate increase on your bill. And that's the modeling that Citizens Climate Project has done. And so the dividend goes back to the people, and it's a net neutral bill because about 5% of the money taken in operates the fund through the Department of Treasury. So no new tax dollars in the budget time are needed to manage this thing. And it gets up to $1 trillion in 10 years. I mean, this will drive the power company who say, I'm getting tired of looking over there at those windmills and those solar farms, which are 30% cheaper than the oil I'm getting from the Canadian tar sands, okay, which we get a lot of our oil from that. So we're going to invest in solar farms and wind farms. And that's the market working. Right now, it's skewed so badly on the incentives that even with the incentives favoring fossil fuels 2 to 3 to 1, wind is still cheaper than coal, cheaper than oil, and competitive with natural gas. If you leveled the playing field, which a carbon fee would do, these things are barn burners. They're great stuff. That's how that works. Does that make sense?
One other point would be that you incent people to use less carbon, so their dividend is worth even more.
Yeah, use less energy. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're talking about the extraction industries. What about cattle and methane and just reducing the impact of agribusiness?
Well, that's us. Who's had any meat this week?
Not me.
Who is married to a Tyrannosaurus Rex? And what that means is some people actually have a metabolism that need meat protein. That's a known scientific medical thing for many, many years. But not all of us. So the reason there's so many cows in the world is because we eat so much meat. This is our diet we're talking about. And Japan and China and India and the Mideast and all these countries are trying to be like us. So guess what? They're eating more meat. And guess what? 80% of our arable farmland is used to raise cattle. And this is a non-sustainable thing.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be really any effort to do anything in that realm. It's all about the extraction.
No, there is.
Is there?
There's quite a few people that, I mean, the increase in organic farms, diverse farms, not just monocrops or just cows, and the family farms. Several of my clients have been farmers, organic farmers, and they want to get their kids back there. The kids go to school, get a degree in agriculture and economics and business, and come back and manage that farm. Most farmers don't pay themselves. They pay their bills through the selling of their crops, but they don't have money for investments and stuff like that. It's a really difficult business because the monster factory farms are like the giant mega superstores. Okay, and so this is out of whack. So people are actually, I would say hundreds of thousands of people in America are actually working on this now.
Yeah. I think you answered it because mine again was on the economic model because it doesn't seem if you're giving the price back to households in the form of a dividend, even though the energy is more expensive, there's no incentive to buy less of it.
You and I typically don't have the financial capital to, in some cases, even put solar panels on our house. Okay. The power company does. They make long-term power contracts with the power producers. Natural gas plant, coal plant, solar farm, wind farm, something like that. Those power producers will react to the demand by the power the middlemen who distribute through the lines the power to you. They will, and that group will react to what you demand. If you say, I only want clean energy, and they'll say, well, you got to pay 2 cents more a kilowatt hour for it. Okay, I will. Get them audited, by the way, though, to make sure they're really doing that. You know, because a lot of them ain't.
No, but that's not in
But-
this model, right?
It's all in the model, absolutely. Because what you need is we have a dynamic capitalism and a democracy under siege, I would say. So when you put those two things together and you use market forces, guess what? You become the guide, the policymaker. So one of the things I say in my book is you don't want to be a customer to Eversource. You want to be a partner. So Ann and I are getting solar panels put on our house, and we're going to produce about 138% of the energy we need. That 38% we're going to sell back to Eversource. Now, right now, Connecticut doesn't have a good deal on that, but I'm an optimist. I think they are going to make policies that will make that better. But even with that, our payback is reasonable for us. So, if the power companies, instead of seeing solar panels on a house as a threat, which many do, they say, okay, how do we restructure our model using that stuff I talked about, risk assessment, okay, and sustainable practices, and see you as a partner. This is what happens when the market takes over, when the playing field is somewhat level. A carbon fee levels the playing field and then gets some money to you so you're not penalized on a monthly basis during this transformation. That's why it's structured this way.
I think when you're answering my question about this, that the big point that I took away from it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, you know, it's an upstream incentive is the biggest incentive, because it's like the person generating, or not generating, it's the person sending the fuel, whether it be oil, gas,
Mining the
or
natural
coal,
resource,
is being assessed that tax, but they're passing that tax on to the generating plant. And that generating plant suddenly becomes less competitive with renewables.
That's right.
And that's where the biggest incentive, I think, is.
That's exactly
where
right.
you're getting.
You got it
And
right.
so the idea is to pass some of that down, you know, the costs, the added costs, give it back to the ratepayer.
So a power provider contract, typically 10, 15, 20 years even. They're that long, okay. And because they, by law in most states, have to provide 24/7, 365 days a year, have on their grid maximum demand availability. And at night, they don't need it. In 2 of the 4 seasons, they typically don't need it. See? So this helps us balance some of that out. And if I'm producing my own power, and you're producing your own power, and you're producing your own power, but the extra goes into the grid for those people who can't do that, then the power companies can say, I think there's a business model here that can keep us all employed. We do not want to get rid of these companies because the people in these companies are just like you and me. They're good people. I used to work for the largest mining company in the world, BHP. And my mom, a hyper-environmentalist, would send me letters with environmental stickers all over them. And the secretary would say, here's another one of those letters. And she'd say it with all this distaste. And I said, you love my mom. Okay. But the point is, that secretary was a great person. And I know these geologists and engineers and people like that. There are a few knobs up there that, you know, kind of spill the pudding. But the thing is, they have the infrastructure that allows a lot of this to work if people retrain and restructure and reinvest and assess risk properly. Then it works. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a general question. Where does the number for the, let's say, the temperature's rising by 1.5 degrees, where does that number come from? Is it the average of all the temperatures in the world?
Yep. It's a global average temperature. calculated since about 1880.
So there
1880.
are other specific points on the planet that take the temperature.
Remember that rose diagram that had all those little pins?
Yeah.
Though, that's 250 countries on that plot. And each one is measuring. They have their own information because they have a weather station and they have the weatherman that says, well, in Nigeria today it's going to be really hot. So, NASA says, well, let's collect all that data and let's make a graph out of it. And you go, wow, it goes from soft colors to bright red. As the Earth system, the Earth went through what would be like a heart palpitations or a micro heart attack from about the 30s to about the 70s. The systems were just torquing. They were twisting, trying to balance. And they couldn't do it because more and more CO2 was being pumped into the air. And the planet was responding by holding energy from the sun and putting it into the ocean. 70% of the energy that is causing this planet to warm that's being saved on the Earth goes into the ocean. The oceans are a big body of water. When you heat that baby up, it takes a long time to cool it down. Longer than you, your kids, and your kids' kids have time for. We're going to kill the coral reefs by the end of the century. After a mass extinction event in geology, it typically takes 1 to 5 million years for the coral reefs to come back. So there are people who will never see a living coral reef system. There'll be little patches, they'll be in the aquariums, and there's even people trying to grow them so they're more resistant. But this is a huge, complicated dynamic system. And so it's like the big, huge air balloon. You stick a pin in it. Okay, for the first few days, it's looking a little wonky, but we're not worried about it. After a week, we're starting to descend into the rocky cliffs below where there's lions, tigers, and bears. And that's kind of where we are right now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like from your analysis that the feed-in dividend is proven to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also said we had a 12-year time window to mitigate the bulk of the damage from climate change. Would that alone be enough, or what would you have to complement it with?
That alone would not be enough. And that's an IPCC number, and that comes from thousands of scientists in about 50 countries working in
So I guess the next logical question, if it's not enough, is what else would you have to partner with? It sounds like you need to do this first in order to get even any.
Yeah. Well, since 20% of the greenhouse gases come from cows, diet would be a good thing to look at.
That's a
Right.
good thing to look at. As you mentioned before, people are quite confident and do not like to change, especially on a very personal level, especially with food.
The hardest thing is lifestyle.
Yeah.
Lifestyle. I am going to eat that meatball if it kills you. What? So Ann and I had this hilarious discussion about the people that try to make meatballs that are made out of vegetables and nuts to taste and look like meatballs, even so that when you cut into it, the beet juice looks like blood. Why don't you just eat a delicious vegetarian ball? It doesn't have to be a meatball. Let's teach our palate, and I make really good barbecue veggie nut ball. I mean, I like it. Come on over, you can try one. I'll bring them to, Jason, where are you? I'll bring a bunch of them here, and everybody can try them.
Yeah.
All right, January. So that's a big thing. The second thing is transportation. Public transportation. Yeah.
The hole in the ozone layer is shrinking,
Mhm.
so that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
How does that fit into all these bad things?
Well, it's a good thing in all these bad things. That's the chlorofluorocarbon thing, which regulation through the government, state and national, changed in the 80s. So that's where policy works. That's a great example of it.
So, being that we're probably not going to change our diet, and we're going to keep driving cars worldwide and making fuel, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, the person next to you just said you are going to change that. And I'm just guessing it's oatmeal for the rest of the year.
So are you optimistic or pessimistic that we tip over or we grab it back?
It'll be different. you can't undo this. The Earth's system is literally like a snowball going down a hill. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and at some point you might be able to slow it down and stop it. Then you say, okay, here's where it is. Now, how do we balance our economies? It will be, and already is, different. Another thing you hear from politicians is, oh, we'll worry about that when we're being affected by it. Newsflash, we're being affected by it! Oh, I'm in the library, I shouldn't tell. But we are already being affected. In fact, 85 people died in California because of the Camp Fire. And that's directly related to two things. One is not climate change, and that's how we manage our suburban, rural spaces in areas that can catch on fire and flood and all this. And the other reason is climate change, because that climate is being stressed by long-term droughts, then floods, then long-term droughts, then floods. And the climate models say what you'll see is more intense storms, shorter duration, but more intense storms. All that rain comes right now, no place to put it, you get a flood. See? So we've been in the middle of it since probably this whole last century, actually, when you look at the effects. Yeah?
What role could preventing deforestation, encouraging reforestation, and decreasing population growth rate, can they play a significant role in
Directly.
helping to?
So the question is planting forests and reducing deforestation and controlling population. We have 7.6 billion people in the world right now. Oh, no, wait. 7.7. Oh, wait, 7.8. 2050, we're at 9.6 on current trajectories, okay? So controlling population is huge. Huge, huge, huge. And we've known that for 2 generations. The second thing is the reforestation and being careful on how we cut. Now, timber is a natural resource. Everybody uses it. I go to Home Depot, just like everybody else, and I go to the wall of tools and go, wow, if only I could have. The thing, though, is trees sequester carbon. And they are the largest sequester of carbon in terms of volume because there's more trees than wetlands, for instance. Wetlands are more effective, but there's not as many of them. So yes, control population, it's not remotely related, it is directly related. Yeah.
How do wetlands sequester carbon?
I couldn't let the thing about vegetables pass. So.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because there's lots you can do. Because first of all, if it's part of your moral or religious system, then you can't eat meat at all, right? But if it's just about meat's not good for the environment, I just have to eat less, right? So it's not like every time you eat, all you have to do is eat less.
Yeah.
And there's so many things. There's a whole movement called Meatless Mondays in the public schools. Other institutions. You can put pressure on, the restaurant. The restaurants around here define farm to table as very, very meat-centric. Very meat-centric, So anytime you're in a restaurant, even if you want to eat meat, just ask them what their vegetarian options are. So they get to hear that people are actually interested in eating, vegetarian entrees. And the thing is, if you're eating conventionally produced meat, you might as well just go to the gas station and put the guzzle in your mouth, because that's basically what you're consuming. And who can afford to eat organic meat all the time, right? So a more vegetable-based, diet just makes sense.